guests today who are joining us, who are all industry professionals, working in a range of different areas and sort of specialisms across the field of sustainability, and particularly in relation to the fashion industry. So the premise of today is to really look at, sustainability is obviously a huge topic. So what we're really focusing on today is to look at how students are developing a real interest in working within sustainability as a career path, and what that means for them. So students are starting to develop an awareness of, yes, I would like to work in the field of sustainability, but what does that mean? What are the kind of options that I have within that? So we're looking at different working methods, how that can be employed into different areas within their career paths, and looking across a whole section from sort of fabric sourcing and selecting through to disposable of waste products, and that's just touching very lightly on some of the sort of aspects of sustainability and different approaches that people and companies may be taking, from starting your own business, for example, or perhaps how it's embedded more into sort of larger scale business models. And also looking at these kind of skills and attributes that perhaps graduates or current students now can start to really think about in terms of how they might develop these if they have an interest in sustainability as a potential career path for them in the future. So I think what I'd like to do to start with is just get you all to introduce yourselves. So perhaps if we just start over here and just work around, and you just tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Okay, so I'm Alicia. I'm founder of Bourgeois Bohem. So it's an ethical, vegan, sustainable footwear label for men and women. And our business premise is built obviously on the pillars of sustainable sourcing, ethical production, and vegan materials.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Olivia. I'm a very recent graduate from the MA Fashion Futures, and I won the SET challenge this year, and now I'm setting up my business with my two business partners, and our business is called Joa.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia. My background is in design. I studied design here at London College of Fashion and got interested in sustainability and ran my own business, which was a design studio shop and fair trade knitwear label called Here Today, Here Tomorrow for 8 years. I then moved more into education, so I'm working now full-time as a lecturer here at LCF teaching about fashion and sustainability.
Fantastic, great, thank you.
I'm Charlotte Turner, so I am Sustainable Apparel and Textile Specialist at the consultancy EcoAge. I also actually studied here at LCF several years ago. I studied design, worked within the industry, also within education, NGO, and now I'm working directly with brands.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I am the Circular London lead on fashion. I work for the London Waste and Recycling Board. I look at how we can help large businesses look at circular economy business models in relation to fashion, and also I look at policy, and we do other projects such as how do we help consumers to understand not to be throwing textiles and waste into the bins, how do we get them to reuse it and upcycle it.
Quite a broad remit.
Yeah, it's very broad. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I work at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion in the Education Department. I also studied here at London College of Fashion many years ago in textiles, and I worked in the industry for 8 years, so I have a very good understanding of working in industry, but I've been working in research and education for the last 5 years around sustainability and how to embed that within curriculum.
Fantastic, thank you.
Hi, I'm Moshri. I started off as a business journalist in India and then worked in fashion marketing for many years. Had my ethical intervention and came to London College of Fashion to do the sustainability MA here, graduated last year. And since then I've been exploring sort of the intersections that lie between fashion, sustainability and technology through my writing, and doing a bunch of projects around research with some fashion startups.
Okay. Fantastic, thank you. So I think it's clear from those introductions that we have a really kind of broad perspective on sort of sustainability across sort of businesses and the fashion sector. So we've got a list of questions that we proposed to you before you came here. They're quite broad and we won't necessarily stick to the whole remit of going through them all, but they're just good sort of starting points for us to start the conversation, and we'll sort of use them as a guide. So perhaps if we just start off with one of them. And I think what we'll do is we'll start off talking more broadly about sustainability. And I think we'll start off with what steps are businesses taking towards creating positive environmental outcomes. So what sort of sustainability trends are emerging? So it could be things like materials, production processes, waste procedures, supply chain, etc. So I think the idea of sort of emerging trends, because we have some sort of reasonable foundations of our understandings of sustainability, but it's such a sort of huge growing trend that what are the kind of key sort of trends that are really emerging that you're all individually looking at the moment that are really capturing your attention? Anyone wants to start, that something's leaping out?
I'm happy to volunteer.
Yeah.
So we work with quite a wide range of businesses. Like I said, fashion, but also jewellery, beauty, lots and lots of different products. And I think, firstly, I think that businesses are realising that it's a business imperative that they need to be looking at this, that it isn't a trend which is going to go away, and that this is something which is essential for them to continue their licence to practice. And so I think that what I'm seeing more of is companies taking a step back, looking at their entire business practice, understanding where their potential risks and impacts are, and where the kind of gaps are against best practice, to then identify, right, well, this is our biggest risk area. It could be materials, for example. It could be, we have a lot going on with circularity at the moment, and it could be, working conditions as well. So, we do a lot of work with people around things like living wage, making sure that, ethical manufacturing actually does take into consideration every component of the supply chain. So from the perspective of working with different types of businesses, I would say that's quite an important one, just to get a big picture of the business, to understand the priorities.
Anyone else? One of the kind of key things I picked up on was sort of risk elements actually to a business. That's quite an interesting way of looking at it. And I guess there's two ways of looking at it, that you sort of come in at it, that it is your sort of positive sort of model, or a sort of a risk model almost. And does anyone have any kind of ideas around that, or similar thoughts around sort of the trends, or how you might be approaching it from your own business?
Yeah, I mean, I don't work for a particular fashion business. We work with the fashion businesses, and you're absolutely right. What you're seeing is the fashion companies are being held more accountable for their own actions, by their customers and by the general public. But also, they're starting to realise that if they don't make changes, that their competitors will, and they'll lose the race for their customers in that way as well. So it's not just the damage that they could be doing environmentally, it's also the loss of customers in other ways. And we're seeing a big move towards companies looking to explore circular economy business models in fashion. If you saw some of the ThreadUp reports recently about the huge growth in resale, and you're starting to see growth in other areas like leasing models, and also a really big interest in companies wanting to look and explore what would work for them. And 2 years ago, there wasn't the same appetite there. So there's that real, if I don't do it, somebody else will, edge coming through as well. Really, definitely now.
From the point of view of education, I think that is very, particularly what Charlotte was saying about the risk, it's very much a sort of business hack way of thinking about it. And so when I'm talking and having lectures or workshops with students, we tend to try and put it more about what are the possibilities here, what are, how can you come at this from a creative perspective, and less about sort of calculating risk, which perhaps for design students particularly it might sort of send them to sleep, but to make them think this is about experimentation and innovation and the kinds of things that as design students get them really fired up and really excited.
I think that students and graduates have that really interesting space to experiment and explore that, and that's what businesses are finding really valuable, because like they have that perspective and that way to kind of challenge and question and develop project ideas that you wouldn't be able to do necessarily when you're working in industry. So I think we all encourage as educators to push those boundaries and really try and think about, you know, challenging the status quo and what can you do differently, and whether you are a designer and you're designing a product, or you're a business or media student and you're designing a business model or a strategy, a communications plan. I think it's, you know, what can you do in your area, and what does sustainability mean to you? So
because I think from a business point of view, especially small business, I suppose it's really thinking about not working in the traditional fashion cycle anymore, really, and it's all about, you know, for me as a small company, being agile, and we're able to make changes a lot easier. And, you know, obviously, you know, with consumer demands and behaviours changing, about, you know, having, you know, businesses need to show transparency, etc. So it's a really exciting time. You know, I think people just need to innovate, rethink what they're doing. You know, ownership is another thing. You know, people aren't really looking at ownership of products anymore. It's about businesses sort of offering service really as well, and looking at it from that point of view as well. And therefore, it's just a totally different way of working now, and I think that's valuable moving forward for people who want to look at businesses, etc.
I think I could talk in terms of 2016 when I came to do the MA to like perhaps now. I mean, I remember we were a batch of 15 passionate designers, marketing, business people who wanted to make that change. And often enough, when we would sit and have these conversations, we felt like a bit of an outcast in a conventional fashion school. But now when I talk to, you know, students still at LCF, I'm in touch with a few of them, I write some stories around them, you feel the culture and the thought process permeating all through. So it's no longer having the sustainability module on your course really, or possibly you at some point may not even need a Fashion Futures MA, because I think the ethos and the you know, the whole approach to just the whole idea of this industry is going to go across courses. That's one. And the second bit is I extensively talk to startups in the space, you know, for the pieces I write. And it's so interesting and almost like refreshing to see a lot of people from outside fashion industry coming in to solve the problems that are there. And they don't come with the old conventional thinking. They don't have any baggages anymore. And, you know, and of course we're talking about disruption in terms of whether it's a resale market, rental, circular economy. And it's amazing to see with surgical precision with which they're going at specific issues of fashion, and they come up with a solution. And then you've got programs like Fashion for Good, you know, London Waste Recycling Board. There's a lot of support for these startups. So the ecosystem is also kind of coming together, and obviously the big companies, you know, whether it's a Farfetch or an ASOS, they are coming up with programs caring to work with these startups. So I'm guessing definitely a lot is happening as we speak, and a lot has changed in the last few years.
I also think that a lot of trend reports recently, they've kind of shown that the younger generations are really, like, sustainability is important for them, it's the most important thing. And I think this is kind of a way of helping the bigger companies to kind of realize that they have to change, because it's going to be their future consumer that is going to be buying like that. Okay.
And do you think, kind of, what would you say are perhaps some of the kind of sort of key or kind of core challenges that you might find that you generally tend to kind of come across in your own sort of areas, sort of that will maybe hold you back, or you kind of feel that actually these are kind of real sort of issues?
I suppose for us in the footwear industry, it's finding suitable materials, I suppose. You know, there's the sustainable ankle events, etc. I mean, lots and lots of amazing sustainable materials coming on board now. You know, there's Muskin and Pinatex and cork and recycled materials, etc. But for small companies like us, it's about minimums and getting hold of these materials, and then being, for us in footwear, are they suitable for it? And, you know, we work on small production and things like that. So, you know, the idea is there that we would love to do lots of different things, but sometimes we're just held back by the practicalities of things. It's still doable, definitely, like, don't give up. You know, and obviously, like yourself, you know, you're using vintage recycled fabrics and things like that. So there's always some sort of solution there, depending on what your sustainable stance is.
And did you feel that kind of that obviously compromises you in terms of kind of what you would ideally like to do, and perhaps limitations around
Yeah.
what's realistic to your, you know, to your business doing well.
Yes. Yeah.
You know.
Not doing well, but I suppose I would love to have a perfect product. You know, but I think we can't aim for perfection. You know.
Yeah.
So as long as we're doing as best as what we can, and we're sourcing and we're producing the best product that we can, that within our resources, then we're truly honest about it. You know, we say we're not perfect. This is what we're doing. This is how we're trying to improve. And then I think, you know, as long as you're honest, I think people will, you know, hopefully, you know, support us. Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that? I think the key word of sort of that transparency is quite sort of a strong word, isn't it? In the sort of, you know, the talk and the voice of sort of sustainability in relation to sort of how consumers feel, particularly connecting to brands. And is that something you come across quite a lot?
Yeah, I mean, especially for brands, because they see what happens to brands that say one thing and then it will come out that actually they've been doing things that aren't as ethical or as sustainable as they've been claiming. And I think one of the real issues that traceability is trying to tackle is that fact that for large companies, they have extremely complex supply chains. They might know what's happening in their first tier, they might know a bit what's happening in tier 2. Beyond that, how do you trace all of those different elements if you've got one jacket which has 75 different pieces in it from you know, and how many times has a material gone through different hands before it even reaches the main wholesaler, you know. So it's all of those things that are really issues that we see technology, and I'm sure Mushroom will know more about this than I do, that we see the traceability tech coming in to try and solve at the moment, because that's a real big demand from not only the customers but the brands themselves, that they really want to see those issues solved.
That was actually exactly what I was thinking, the challenge of traceability and the fact that you have really established businesses with really complex supply chains. They're not linear, they go all over the place. It is so incredibly complex, and even with, you know, technology coming in, it's still such a huge issue. And then as well, you have this, I think traceability and transparency are being talked about together an awful lot, and it's so interesting because with the best will in the world, you might have companies who say, well, like you say, we can, you know, we work with people in tier 1, tier 2, we can trace them this far, but we're aware that we have gaps in our vision and our knowledge in these other areas. And even if, you know, the consumer says, well, I want to know exactly where you're producing, this large company might say, well, we're not going to do that because of competition. You know, we're working within this, you know, massive, huge fashion system which already exists, and you know, if you can't get everybody to kind of come along on the same journey with you, it's really difficult. It's that thing of competition, and you know, I think we're certainly seeing improvements there, but that's also, you know, quite a challenge that internally they might be doing all these amazing things, but they just say, well, we can't talk about this externally.
I personally quite grapple with it because I worked in fashion marketing. My job was to make sure that I use the power of data to sell you the next shirt that's out there and make you buy more and more. And I was at a talk yesterday, and there was an interesting stat that got thrown out that last year we produced 100 billion garments while the population of the world stands at 7 billion. So overproduction is something that keeps constantly coming up, about the fact that the system is broken, and how do you, and circularity and recycling is not the way out of the situation. But and then of course, you know, you have H&M doing what it does, and it gets called out for the fact that it's still producing. So I personally, and obviously I've come from a very mainstream fashion background, and I've got this new lens on. I'm kind of struggling a bit in terms of, okay, how do I now go back into the industry and play my tiny role towards, you know, evolution of this industry to a place where we are not, where fashion just becomes something to enjoy and no longer talk about it in terms of, you know, the dark side of the industry that there is, whether it's the people, the people who get exploited or the environmental impact. So yeah, I'd love your thoughts on that, because, you know, that's something I personally struggle with. It. Okay, now I want to go back and perhaps work for a company tomorrow. Working for an ethical brand might be different, because so if I want to go and work for a bigger company, you know, I struggle. I have an ethical dilemma in my head, and you know, how to kind of make the two meet and still be happy at the end of the day.
I think that's a really difficult problem at the moment, because what we do a lot is we look at sustainability being such a big and complex topic that actually what is really important is trying to identify what it means to you and what your values are, and then trying to explore what companies also maybe align with your values in order to work with them. Which is also, you know, sustainability in fashion is an emerging discipline, and so I think it is about going into traditional roles and then questioning and challenging from that space and challenging from within. So it's not an easy task, but we're in that space where it's emerging, and that is the challenge to go out
and we do need those people. We need people like you who have industry experience and have branched off and got this whole other wealth of knowledge and, like you say, a different lens now. Everybody has their own route and path and interests and career aspirations, and some people will set up their own business, some people might get into education, but some people, I hope, will also go back into the conventional mainstream fashion industry and work with it, because otherwise the only people working in it are the ones who aren't aware or aren't motivated for that change to come about.
And I think this is sort of an ongoing conversation. Myself and from Careers, LCF Careers, and Gabby have sort of worked a little bit on this together already, and we've looked at sort of, you know, students are coming in and saying to us, we want to work in, you know, have a career path that has a sustainable sort of focus, and, you know, can you sort of give me some advice on this? And actually we're looking at this in a bigger picture and saying, actually, what, you know, how do we approach this? What's the right way to approach this? You know, if we're looking at it from a sort of skill set, what kind of skills would somebody be likely to need if they were going to look to go into a career within that field? And is that the right question to be asking? You know, it's a very sort of complex topic. But I think, would you like to talk a little bit about it, Gabrielle, from the sort of research that you've done and some of our kind of conversations?
Yeah, so I actually interviewed different fashion industry professionals, and you know what they're really looking for is a really good understanding of the traditional role. So whatever you're studying, making sure that you actually, like yourself, have a good awareness of the traditional fashion system, but with a keen interest and awareness of what is going on globally, and how do you communicate really complex issues and being able to kind of articulate what that means to business and what benefit that is, and what are the risks, what are the opportunities. So I think communication skills are really important, because you can come with all this knowledge, but if you can't explain it to the business, then it's kind of it's missing that gap. And so really trying to kind of, you know, show that you have the awareness of the industry, but this changing landscape and where that's going, and you know, and what are the kind of problem solving ideas that you have, but you know, what concretely are the issues, and how you communicate that clearly is really important. So yeah, I think those are the kind of challenges really that we're looking at, is communicating how, what and why.
Yeah, and I think some of the skills as well, it's very much about sort of, we sort of looked as well at kind of an inward, sort of an inward and an external. So if a graduate, for example, was looking to move into a role within sustainability, or perhaps looking for brands that are particularly focused on sustainable approaches or practices, or have that embedded within their business in some areas, you know, how would they sort of go about aligning themselves with that? So we kind of looked at what would be their own values. So what's their value system? You know, what does it mean to them? What does sustainability mean to them? So a sort of internal kind of identification of sustainability within them, which I think is really important. The sort of the individual going into the business, which is obviously very key if you're starting up your own business, or even if you're going in to a sort of larger organisation, and where do you fit within that, and not necessarily feeling you have to fix the whole picture, but it's about how do you contribute and on what level. And we talked about that in sort of quite a broad term actually, you know, in a very sort of obvious practical way. Well, if I'm working as a designer, how can I implement that in the design process, but also how can I contribute in terms of sort of making sure I turn lights off in my building, and down to things like that. So it's quite a broad topic. But I'd quite like to sort of also think a little bit about perhaps advice you might give to someone if they were starting up their own business, for example, around sort of sustainability. Could you give any sort of advice to a graduate, what they might want to think about or sort of consider? I mean, that's a very broad question, I know.
No, joking. I suppose once, decide what your USPs or what your aspects of sustainability would be. Obviously, for me, veganism is number one, and then it's everything else from that. So deciding on what that would be. I suppose very much knowing, what your design ethic will be, or what you want that business to be. But I think also too, once again, it's about thinking, as I said before, differently about what the traditional fashion cycles are, and thinking of how you want to address that, and being, people are looking at innovation. Consumer behaviours are changing, and they demand a lot more. Including customers within the journey of what you're doing within the business, I think is very important. Thinking beyond sort of the box, you know, about how we talk about sort of recycling or reusing or renting or whatever else that model is. So I think just those are my thoughts about that.
Okay. And a little bit kind of what you were saying about the disruptor element. It's quite.
Yeah, I think because I just kind of went through this whole cycle of thinking about a business idea and then kind of pitching it to an audience. And for me, I think important is to be really creative, especially in kind of the production. Like, how do you stay creative and a designer, but how do you kind of manage to combine this with production and your communication? I think it's an easy saying, like thinking out of the box, but really the nice thing about setting up the business is that how we've had is that bigger businesses, they struggle so much to change because they're too big, and everything is already set up how it is. And you coming in as a fresh mind, you can really kind of see what's around you and what can you do and what do you value, and then create something that's maybe totally different from anything anyone knows. And I think so, just be very open and explore yourself and your environment. And
Also, I think a lot of students are open to the idea of launching their own business, which has nothing to do with making a product. They're looking at solutions and services, because I have people from my batch, and I think we were batch 15, and majority designers, most of them have stopped making clothes. This is because there's enough and more already happening. Someone's doing research, someone's launching an online platform to connect people. So it's really interesting to see that you're applying the same thought process, but looking at maybe different aspects of the industry that need to be addressed, which is what even we see in Set Challenge, right? You see so many interesting ideas come up around the fashion business, which may not have to do with a fashion brand, like a product. So I think that's quite heartening.
In my experience of having a business, one of the most central things to it was the relationships that we had. I was working with two other business partners as well, so our relationship of working together was crucial. But with our suppliers and producers, with our customers, those relationships were so central to, that was kind of the heart of the business, really. I think this also kind of comes back a little bit to this thing about communication and how you say who you are and what you do and foster those. And so in terms of being able to collaborate, being able to, when you have your own business, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades. You have a different hat on every half an hour, depending on whether you're doing sales, whether you're doing design or production or your spreadsheets, whatever. But of course, there are going to be things that are outside of your skill set, and you have to collaborate with other people. And so for students to really understand that when you get them to do group projects, There is a reason why,
Yeah.
because those skills are absolutely essential to running a business. Of course, in industry and working in industry as well.
I mean, I think I want to add to that because I completely agree. I think that's really, really essential, and I think part of that with those relationships and that collaboration is an idea of constant learning and learning from other people, educating yourself. Because, for instance, you know, I've worked with a huge amount of brands from startups to really massive established brands, and again, I think there's just this incredible will of people to do good and to create better products and to, you know, be more responsible with their business and to share this with their customers and communicate it with them. But I think something which is so important is to make sure that before you do any communication with your customer that you really understand everything yourself. Like it's such a massive minefield, and it's, you know, when you talk about sourcing fabrics, it's a huge area. I mean, I've specialised this in several years and I'm still learning every single day, and I think that you need to be open to the fact that you are constantly going to learn, but you need to be able to question things all the time. So, you know, if somebody says, oh, this material is super sustainable, it's certified, etc., well, you ask, why is it more sustainable? How has it been made? What certificate does it have? Send me the evidence of this. Let me actually check that what you're saying is true and that it's accurate. And then from there, you can understand, right, well, this is what I can communicate with my customer. This is what we're doing better. And these are where the challenges still are, because, you know, you were saying we accept there are a lot of things out there that we don't have a perfect answer to just yet, but there's a huge amount of research and development going on. So making sure that you're constantly aware of what's coming out in the market, what people are demanding, what research is going on, and, you know, we need people pushing the boundaries and being really innovative with what they develop, and then that, you know, helps get it to the end consumer and to communicate it in a really engaging but educational way, I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems is that sustainability means something different to each and every individual one of us, with students, businesses. So I think if you can find out and articulate what it means to you, and that very much comes down to values, and whether you're looking at social or environmental or both, but I mean, it's such a big topic that you kind of need to decide what's important to you. And being able to communicate that authentically rather than just saying kind of the big buzzword, I think that will really help. You know, for students to kind of align themselves with a company, or just communicate what it is in order to, you know, say, if you're setting up a business, this is what I'm looking at, or this is what I'm trying to find a solution for. So I think definitions are very broad, and yeah, collaboration definitely need to be on the kind of same page with that, but it's one thing which is a barrier, but it needs to kind of be explored and defined for yourself, really.
Yeah.
I think in terms of this idea of transparency, you know, businesses and indeed students shouldn't be afraid to say we're doing our best, but, you know, there are areas where we're still working on it. And, you know, I had a student come up to me saying, oh, I want to do my project using sustainable materials and this, that and the other, but I'm really worried if I do that, I'll get scrutinised on the other things that aren't sustainable. And, you know, part of what I was talking to her is, well, we've all got to start somewhere, and I think if you acknowledge where your focus is and why that's your focus, and other things, you can only do things one step at a time. And that kind of honesty, I think with businesses, they tend to want to put the spin on it and the kind of marketing glossy, like the big buzzwords and things. But actually, if there was this more kind of honest and authentic way of communicating with people, you'd actually feel like, well, this is a journey, and that there is no such thing as the perfect sustainable business or product or material. We're sort of working this all out in a very holistic way. You know, every student project, every business, big or small, is approaching this in a different individual way, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, as we are as individuals, because we are the customers that buy these products ultimately, and, you know, so it's kind of you know, we have to take the responsibility as well as sort of businesses taking their active responsibility as well. I think one of the questions that you've kind of answered actually, but I'm just going to put it out there, is that what roles are there available to graduates wanting to work in sustainability? And obviously that's like a kind of really broad question, and perhaps maybe if you're looking at kind of some of the bigger companies, you know, there may be more specified roles that are coming up around that. But I think some of the sort of areas that we've touched on today really show how, even if the role doesn't have sustainability in the job title, it's very much can be embedded within the sort of the actual role itself, and that's sort of very much kind of, you know, individual thing in terms of how you're bringing it to the role yourself. But I think perhaps from the biggest perspective of larger companies, I mean, you might sort of know a little bit more about this in terms of how, you know, how's that sort of emerging.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, if you're talking about what jobs are there in sustainability, basically it's endless. It comes back to what you were saying. You know, it could be a platform that just looks at a certain solution for, you know, it's just mind-boggling the amount of variety there is and the innovation that's coming through. I think in terms of changes that I've seen really recently is, and I don't remember ever seeing companies looking for sustainability managers that actually had circular economy in the title or as part of their job definitions. You know, that wasn't even thought about a few years ago. So there is a real drive to looking not just at waste and recycling as the solution, but okay, how do we embrace new ways of looking at what we're doing, and so it might not just be about sales anymore, which is revolutionary for any company at the moment. So that kind of mindset is huge, because a few years ago, and you still get it in a lot of companies, the sustainability role was lumped in with something else like health and safety or risk management, or, you know, they did the sustainability role meant basically all CSR. You know, there wasn't anyone with a specialism in anything in particular. It was just more, okay, what standards and boxes do we need to tick? So I think I'm sure you've seen complete changes as well through what you're seeing, but it's the diversity that's coming through, I think, is the main trend.
Yeah. And also what you were saying about the fact that traditionally you would have the job sort of lumped in with something else, and that it would be a kind of a satellite like extra, and it wasn't really connected to the rest of the company, and that you would have these poor sustainability managers sitting there trying to just do everything and trying to, you know, make sure that the kind of the logistics and the operations and the sourcing and everything, and trying to get all of the different teams on board. And a lot of what we do is we work with really big companies from a top-down approach, so that we actually get sustainability integrated across the business, and then we work on engagement across every part of the business to actually help everybody be aligned and to understand what the aims of the company are, and how everybody can make their own contribution to the sustainability goals of the company, and have agency over what they're doing themselves. Like you were saying, even within a traditional role, everybody can make a contribution in this area. And I think we're seeing, you know, we're also seeing people create their own roles. The fact is, you can go, and I've done this myself, you can go into a company who doesn't have a defined role and just create your own role. There's so many opportunities, particularly for people coming from such creative courses, to be able to go in and say, actually, this is how you're doing your business practice, but I think that we can be going in this really exciting direction, and I want to lead on this.
I think that's another thing is the innovation side as well. So you're seeing innovation teams who have people that are dedicated to finding the disruptive solutions that they might not have come up with themselves, but with people such as yourselves are coming up with external to their own business. And that whole looking and collaborating role is something that, you know, is another big growth area of seeing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's very positive.
Yeah, I think the students who are interested, you know, I think they're maybe hoping that it's going to be so straightforward as sustainable designer. Or,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, exactly.
and
I have to say, from a careers perspective, that's almost how it feels. You know, they come in and you know, they sort of want sort of advice around it. It is almost the sort of answer that they want, you know.
Yeah.
So it's about educating them in terms of, well, what does it mean, but how can we do that in a really kind of clear and sort of very consistent way for them to, you know, develop that understanding and be able to convey that across in an interview, or, you know, take that further into the business, or, you know, to sort of convince somebody to actually like create a new role, or, you know, how to create the voice around it. give
I mean,
them
I
the
think
confidence.
proactivity and perseverance, those are kind of qualities that they, it's hard work.
Yeah.
It's not something that is so straightforward as what we've just described. It is about good old-fashioned networking.
Yeah.
It's about trawling LinkedIn and looking for those sustainability managers and reaching out. It's about going to events, going to talks, taking opportunities to speak with people. You've kind of got to really put yourself out there, which is really hard work and it can be quite draining, but all you need is that one conversation and that one moment with someone where you say something that chimes with them and that can lead to a new position or consultancy or perhaps less traditional ways in as well.
And also actually something else is that I think in a lot of traditional careers you have a kind of quite well-defined linear career progression path, whereas in this area I found that actually it's not a linear path. It kind of can go all over the place, and like you say, opportunities can just pop up anywhere, and you really just have to be super flexible and not kind of think, well, I'm going to climb the ladder in this very specific way. I mean, there are so many random opportunities out there.
And I think it's really, I sort of made a note of something you said about the learning is ongoing, and I really liked that, and it kind of fits into what you're saying actually, that you might start off somewhere, but actually it's such an emerging sort of area that you mentioned earlier on as well, that it's sort of growing with such momentum that actually is a real sort of organic sort of learning process that you'll go take through your career.
I don't think you should necessarily get caught up in looking for sustainability in the job title. It's something that you as a designer will bring to that design role, and a bit like what you mentioned earlier, that we have the Fashion Futures Masters, but in 5 years' time sustainability is actually going to be embedded into all courses. So maybe it becomes less of a specialism, and it's actually embedded within all roles. So I think that you as an individual in a design role or a media role or business, you're bringing your knowledge still to any role, and that's up to you to kind of try and challenge and question that. So it's a changing, evolving landscape. So roles might be coming, new roles might come out, emerge, but also the traditional roles is where you can change that from within that role.
The Caring Collaborative Unit in 2017, I remember Michael Butler from Caring. So I remember a couple of us went up to him and said, so what's your advice to us, like students, So he said, this is 2017, again 2 years back, to say that sustainability, so we are not looking, sustainability team is one thing, but I think everybody in the organization should have that mindset. And that kind of really stayed with me. But it's quite interesting to hear what all of you are saying, because let's say I am like your typical person who's just about entering the market, scouting for opportunities. While there is scope, and I see a lot of scope with startups who are more open to ideas, the big guys are still, and even if I'm looking at, so if I'm not typing in sustainability as a keyword, it's primarily still design-based roles, sourcing specialists, and the sustainability manager is somebody who pretty much runs end-to-end, goes all the way from sourcing, stakeholder management, etc., etc. So for example, somebody like me comes from comms, and you mentioned comm is a big value that you bring to the table. I still haven't, Caring, yes, of course, with an exception of Caring, I haven't seen enough such roles. I think Farfetch is another exception that's coming up in a big way. It's mostly around ethical trading, so like a lot of stuff around supply chain and design and sourcing. But there's stuff happening at the other end of the value chain as well. I haven't quite seen too many roles in that space come up, but as you rightly said, and you as well, that it's about you go up there and make a role for yourself. And it's about the right opportunity to meet because if you go through the HR listed job portals, you'll never make it.
You can also make that role through a traditional design role or through a traditional comms role. And when I was talking about communication, I didn't mean necessarily through a communications role. I just meant how you as an individual student, graduate, designer are able to present why you think that's important from any position and grow that from that.
I agree, but as I said, that I'm like this classic case of person where, let's say, if I'm looking to enter back the industry and I have other friends or colleagues, so I know somebody who went back into a traditional fashion marketing role with this whole idea of, I'll go and change the system. she I think quit in about 6 months, super frustrated.
Yeah, I guess
With the scenario. So it's
not easy to do.
It's not easy. That's what I'm saying. So other than a traditional design role, people who've done, let's say, business courses, the fashion business school, let's say from this college, if you're doing your own business, fair. But if you're trying to get back into a full-on corporate role, it's not so easy. At least that's experience my colleagues, and to some extent I've also had. Hopefully things
Definitely
will
don't think
change.
it's an easy task.
No.
It's
Yeah.
one that hopefully we'll see
Yeah.
it's easier next year and the year after that.
Yeah.
But that only will come about by people like you going back in and
Yeah.
fighting to
And it does need that top level, like you're talking about going to businesses at the top. If you've got a CEO who is very vocally talking about the company's commitment and strategy to support sustainability, which more and more slowly fashion companies are doing, but maybe it does take time for that to filter through. And there is that need for that sort of wider education, really, re-education of people working in that industry. So maybe that's really more where your role could be, perhaps, is that it's working with teams, and if there's the will in the company that's where they want to head, and that those skills are missing, and people like yourself have the knowledge to actually be sort of internal comms or kind of training and staff development.
Or consultancy, I have to say actually. So we, what both you guys are saying, it's so interesting because having that awareness of the traditional fashion system, of traditional roles, of the, fashion supply chain, even though it's a huge complex system, that's something that is needed in, consultancy roles. So for instance at EcoAge, we are a consultancy and a communications agency, and within that we have specialists in the fashion industry, and we can then go and we can actually work with these individual businesses to help them understand what they need to be doing to do business better. And for that, you need to have people who actually know the system. So, for instance, I actually have a design degree myself, and I don't work as a designer, but I use that education that I have and the knowledge that I've grown throughout my career, focusing on sustainability in fashion and textiles, to then help other businesses. So I think as well, like you were saying, having that knowledge of the traditional kind of role, you don't have to go into the business to do it. You can use that in a really powerful way to actually help businesses from other ways. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but we're hiring people. It's a really, really exciting opportunity to work with so many different businesses. Because I worked within a brand when I first left uni, and I thought, this is great, this is so exciting, but it's not having enough impact because the only people I'm reaching are our direct customers. I want to go further back and influence even more people and help even more people, and that took me into education, into non-profit, into working at the sustainable angle actually. And there are just so many possibilities. It's really, really exciting, and it is growing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, where I work, we have the Advanced London team who give advice to SMEs that work across in traditional and looking at circular services and products. And one of my colleagues comes from a design fashion background, and she's not doing anything to do with that now. She's helping hundreds of different businesses to look at how they can do that themselves. So yeah, I think it doesn't. There is more internally than there used to be, but you're absolutely right. I'm not in any way saying that it's gone far enough yet. Of course, I would never say it's gone far enough, but I think there's still a lot of other opportunities out there that are coming along.
I think we made the assumption that everyone thinks about sustainability and ethical production, etc. I live in this world, and I think, everyone knows about it. And I just talk to friends or whatever else. I mean, they hadn't heard of Rana Plaza or Fashion Revolution Week, etc., etc. I think the thing is, don't make the assumption that everyone knows about it, and we just need to therefore be proactive and get out there and inform, really. So, yeah.
I mean, can I actually ask you a question about that, which is interesting, because I have this terrible habit actually of assuming that everybody thinks about these things, that they all know what I'm talking about when I say something really technical.
Yeah.
But in terms of things like Rana Plaza, I mean, I find it quite interesting to think, do you think that within the fashion industry, everyone is kind of aware of the kind of bigger issues that we're facing, but they're not necessarily engaging with it? Or do you think, that there are people within our industry who also still don't even know about massive things like Rana Plaza, which, I mean, to me, I think surely everyone must know about.
No, I think we assume that people do know, and I don't think they do, and why, I don't know. I suppose it was, 2013, but I don't know how they don't know about it, whether they just sort of blinkered and it's just within fashion. If you don't know, I don't understand why not. But
Interestingly though,
I don't know.
when the Stacey Dooley documentary came out,
Oh yeah.
then I remember reading stuff from your website as well. There was a sudden surge of, because I think she is an influencer who comes from absolute mainstream. She managed to get a few people squirming in the seats, like okay.
Yeah.
But which is why, and I think I live in this bubble all the time. People I follow on Twitter, the stuff I write about, the people I meet, I've come from LCF, my friends are on sustainability. Every week, not every week, every few weeks, I definitely go into a Primark because that's the real world.
Yeah.
And they do not care.
No.
It's quite obvious. And I think this morning there was, I think she was an MP from France, she was talking at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, and I think that line I completely loved. She said the way things stand today is that clearly the poor person is making a larger carbon footprint on the planet. We need to design better sustainably produced clothes for the masses, because I think that's one of the reasons I keep saying I want to go back into like a big mainstream company, because luxury is doing what it's doing, and they better be doing it for the kind of money they charge. It's the person who cannot afford to buy shell out £100 for a denim. So I was at a panel again yesterday, and somebody asked, she said, stop buying fast fashion. Good enough for her to say that, and I know she comes from a super privileged position, and then somebody said, but then what? She said, no, go buy secondhand. So are you trying to tell me that somebody who cannot really afford to walk into a sustainable brand store has to go out and buy only secondhand or like from a charity shop? That's not cool. So, which is why I'm like all about people like Primark and H&M. Obviously the wheels are turning slowly, and the whole greenwashing thing keeps coming up, but the other ones need to change, because
there is a fundamental issue here with scale and volume, and the fact that our society generally is predicated on economic growth, which means high productivity, high volume of goods. There's stats out there, I don't know the source, but something like we're consuming 400% more clothing today than we were 20 years ago, but we're spending less of our disposable income on those clothes. So people saying, oh, I can't afford to, they're buying more clothes than ever before. So there's this issue that we have with how much we buy, that we perceive it as being throwaway, that there isn't value associated with these things. We don't look after them, or even if we tried, if they're that cheap, they're not going to last long anyway. So this comes back to this idea of values, and is it about more stuff? There's all this research as well that this reached a level of materialism, it doesn't make us happy. We're not fulfilled. We're kind of disconnected with nature and ourselves, and our sort of inner well-being, and that's all tied up, I think, with consumption, and that's a really big issue.
I think people are just used to going in and buying a pair of shoes for £10, and they don't think about, if it costs £10, what is a person at the end of the road actually getting paid to make that shoe? So I think we're just so used to paying these low prices that when I say, average pair of my shoes is £150, people are like, dropping dead, And it's about, communicating the value, and it's all about quality, and we don't aim to have huge ranges within our, because we're relaunching in July, but we're not going to have huge. It's more about quality and having good product and focusing well on those specific products, and rather than mass production. So I
think there should be a lot more to expose what the hidden costs are. So although something costs £10, well, what has been the environmental and social cost of that? And I think governments should be doing a lot more to regulate and legislate, and there should be more penalties against companies that are exploiting labour or damaging the environment around the world, and more subsidies or benefits for the companies that are actively working against that. So then that will rebalance perhaps this cost issue that we've got, where the things that are so cheap are causing so much damage, whereas if there could be a way that economically these much better products could be more accessible, and there's penalties applied to the companies that aren't, they need those incentives from that end as well. It's kind of carrot and stick.
One of the recommendations the EAC report was put in an overproduction tax. It's a recommendation they didn't take up eventually. I think Lucy Siegel or somebody had put in a recommendation. She's like, what is a spending tax? It's a bit of a joke, 35p. She said, why don't you, I mean, there has to be something to curb overproduction.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, it's all quite complicated.
Especially when it's all ending up in landfill at the end as well.
Yeah. And also marketing, because we were involved in the Environmental Audit Committee inquiry into the sustainability of the fashion industry last year. Is a really good resource, I think, for students to look at. They released a report at the beginning of this year, and it was so interesting because it was a select committee, and it was kind of, I think, a really big step for the government to take to actually intersect in this area and say, we actually want to hear from industry professionals and from different people what are the kind of impacts. And I think that was a huge, huge topic within it, but also the fact of, marketing and communication, and the fact that this huge kind of fashion system is marketing in a really unregulated way. That's something that we were talking about in our submission from EcoAge. And again, I think that if students are wanting to kind of have a positive impact, there are so many areas beyond, like you were saying, the making of products. Like, we can actually look at all areas of the fashion system and look at how are we communicating, these products to people, how are we trying to encourage them to buy, because like you said, it doesn't make us happy, and there is research to show that people have, huge issues with mental health and self-esteem. I personally think is a direct result of how some of these companies are sort of pushing their products and marketing, and I think that, that's a really important area for young people to get involved in, because I think they're the ones who are exposed to this so much, and it's incredibly impactful.
And I think, it's really interesting, and I think sort of so much of this, when you're all talking, that's so, obviously so passionately, the sort of thing that's coming back to me, thinking about sort of anchoring back into this idea of sort of, what this might mean for a graduate, particularly in relation to their sort of their career path around sustainability. And I think having the sustainable mindset, which I think someone said, maybe you or somebody, I'm not sure, I think that's a real key thing, and I think it really ties into kind of what everybody's talking about actually. It's about having that mindset where you sort of understand the sort of key sort of principles or aspects around sustainability, and ultimately kind of, I guess, what that means to you, because we can't address sort of everything on a sort of whole topic. But if I was to sort of go round the room, because we're sort of coming to the end of our open table conversation, but if I was to go around the room and just sort of ask, maybe just for a piece of advice, or sort of something more around what piece of advice would you give to a graduate who's thinking about going in to a career, and they do have a real sort of interest in sustainability. It might be a particular skill you think is useful, a particular mindset, or anything you think, just a piece of information that you just feel perhaps intuitively you might want to kind of sort of give to them. You can start.
I suppose what we've said before, it's about openness about what that career path may be, really, I think, and looking at what the options are out there, really.
I would say pick your battles. You can't do everything all at once, so try and find focus, and don't be so hard on yourself, because we're all far too hard on ourselves, and I'm sure our students who are listening to this are, and a small step is still a step, and be kind to yourself.
Good advice. I think that's great advice. And again, just sort of seizing opportunities and making your own opportunities, and in terms of actual kind of skills and sort of qualities to bring to a role, I think that it really helps to be, to question things and to be quite analytical, and to say, well, I'm not just going to take everything at face value, I want to really delve into it and understand it more, understand the kind of traditional, and then that gives you a better kind of appreciation of the innovative,
I would say, in terms of skills, it goes back to what was being said before. It's those people skills. You have to be able to communicate, and like you're saying, you can't believe that people don't know about Rana Plaza. So it's that spreading that information, and also being able to explain it in a way that that the person listening understands what it means to them. I think is so important. And secondly, I would say the other thing is making sure that you're keeping up to date with what is relevant and what's out there. Like you were saying, knowing about the EAC and what's happened there, and because 5 years ago, I'd never heard the term circular economy, and now it's one of the main drivers that we're seeing through the larger companies. So you need to keep on top of what's going on and what's out there and what's coming through, because they're going to shape whatever roles are coming through in the future, I think.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think what's really valuable to cling on to is that businesses are looking to students and graduates to have this knowledge, so feel empowered by that, and keeping up with an awareness of what's going on, not just kind of locally but globally as well, and continuing to keep updated and to be able to kind of talk about it and debate about it even with your peers, in order to kind of figure out what that means to you and your kind of practice. But yeah, just to kind of be able to talk about it from an interest point of view, as well as, you know, this is what I'd like to achieve, but being able to just articulate what that means to you, I think that's important.
I think definitely sign up for Gabby's course. It's an open, it's an open source. What's the course called? Luxury.
It's actually launching again. I think on the 10th of June. So it's a free online course, and there is everything you need to know about kind of social and environmental issues. Thank you.
I've done that course as was part of my curriculum, and whoever else I know who's signed up for it, they say that's, in the current scenario, the best piece of educational tool available in the industry, like by far. So that was amazing. What's the course called?
It's called Understanding Luxury Fashion in a Changing World. Fashion and Sustainability, Understanding Luxury Fashion in a Changing World. And it's on FutureLearn, but maybe Elaine, you could share the link with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, it really has a good introduction and kind of a way to navigate through all of the issues, and a business perspective as well as a kind of academic and student perspective. And I think one of the other most interesting elements is that this course is global, so you can meet people from across the world, and it's also kind of a community of students, graduates, educators, industry across different small to huge brands, individuals are on there. So some of the conversations that you can have on the platform are really eye-opening and insightful. So contribute to the conversation as well as kind of going through the process, or also use it as a resource. It has millions of resources to kind of.
And the other interesting course is also the Fashion Revolution. They've done one. I think they're launching another new course. I think that's also very interesting. I think for me, as somebody who studied at LCF and gone out, I think there's so much happening in this ecosystem. Sometimes there's so much going on and then you don't find out. I think just keep your eyes and ears open. There's, of course, Center for Sustainable Fashion. Pretty much the reason why I came into LCF, I would say. I mean, you guys thought lead in this industry. I mean, the CSF conference that happened in October by far is the most, Aesthetic Bill is the same, it's the most evolved conversation, and you have access to that because you are studying at LCF. So, and I would pick on Charlotte's recommendation on the EAC report. I think that's definitely the only report out there which is not funded by industry. So it's all out there, an honest opinion of how things stand. LCF, I think, runs events all the time, so keep an eye out for that. And London, I mean, that's one of the reasons I came back after finishing the course, because I personally feel that the thought leadership in this, and of course with, you see it around with Extinction Rebellion, there's so much happening in London. So even outside the college, there's so many events, they're free to attend, network, meet with the right set of people, and the world's yours to conquer.
Fantastic.
Yes, maybe I have a recent graduate as well.
Yeah.
I think we have talked about this a little bit, but when I've been looking for jobs, and when you really hung up on the word sustainability or ethical, then you find almost nothing out there. And I think just don't be scared to apply to other jobs, and then especially during the interview process, just talk to those people, because you're also interviewing them. And you can kind of find out how they work internally, and if they work sustainably, and if this is something they would look into. So just, don't be scared to go everywhere.
Something popped up in my head as well, the collaborative unit.
Oh yeah.
It has enormous power. I mean, I did the caring unit, but if you're not doing the caring unit and you have a sustainability mindset, There are so many courses. There is the media school, business school. Collaborate with different people, come up with new projects. I think it's a great opportunity. Maybe get some work from the industry. That's something, I think that's a good 4 months or whatever the length is of the module, that you can really get out there and put some meaty piece of work and be happy about it.
Fantastic. Great, thank you so much. I think there's a huge, huge amount of really interesting insights there for our students to really sort of think about in terms of sustainable sort of career pathway options for them. Just some really helpful insights, and there's certainly a lot of things that I will be taking and being able to sort of feedback from a sort of careers perspective as well. So thank you so much, everybody, and hopefully the students have really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Sorry, they just wait online. Yes. Yeah. Thursday, can you let me check? I think I wrote 11 o'clock. Yeah, Thursday, 11.
Yeah?
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll send you a link over the weekend.
Yeah,
It's just really amazing start. You should look at it. Christoph was there and we spoke about it as well.
Oh, okay.
It's so much better.
And I just have to since so our team lead